Hello again, everyone. Welcome to this session. And this session is going to be more talking about the finances side and fiscal policy side of ASUM. This is going to be dealing with more of what the business manager, which is actually the role that I'm going to be serving in this next year, will be doing throughout your time as in student government, whether being a senator or whatever other position you hold in the future. So let's just go ahead and dive right on in, and we can look at the document that I have pulled up. So currently right now, this was actually prepared for in the fall 2019. So some of this information that I'm going to be giving you is a little bit different than what will actually be on this document, because there have been some things that have changed, such as our fee. But that right now, this document is a pretty good summation of what the ASUM Finances side is all about, and I'll make sure to note any of the differentiations that are in the fiscal policy side or on our fee side pretty explicitly so that you can know it. So currently, during the fall 2019 semester, our fee was set at $73 a semester. It is now actually set at $76 a semester because during my year, the 2019-2020 academic year, we got and were approved for a $3 fee increase across the board. We also, during that year, got a $35 per semester fee for students that are taking 1 through 6 credits. Originally, that rate was an opt-in fee for students to pay the whole ASUM fee. We just decided to have a compromise where the fee would be mandatory, but it would be a reduced half rate since they were taking fewer credits. So that is the fee structure as of now. When you're listening to this, this could be different. You know, the fee could be at $85 a semester. It could also just stay the same. So make sure that you're keeping up to date with the current status of the ASUM fee, and you can find that information out at umt.edu/ASUM. So let's go ahead and look at the breakdown of the activity fee. So none of the subsets have changed since this document was prepared, but right now you can look at it and we'll kind of look at it and go through together. So KBGA, which is the college radio station, gets funded $7 per student. The Kaiman gets funded at $6 per student, or $6 per student paying the activity fee. ASUM student groups is a $6 per student per semester charge. Now, this actually isn't its own true in nature subset. This is just basically a reserve of our fee to ensure that when we go to final budgeting, we hit $6 per student funding to student groups. When I get down to the final budgeting process and briefly explain it, I'll make sure to include that. It's a little bit confusing, but if you have any questions about that, make sure you talk to your business manager. This policy has been set in place for the last 8 years now. So it's still not necessarily new. It's been in practice for a little while, but it's still not like a very, very set thing like the Kaiman and the KBGA, which have been in set for 30 years. Infant care, which goes to the ASUM Child Care Facility, gets charged $2 a semester, and then the Research and Creative Scholarship Fund gets charged $1 a semester. So, and then just a couple other things, or just one other thing. We also oversee the transportation, or the Office of Transportation, but they are not included in our ASUM student activity fee. So they get their own separate fee on the fee schedule. And last year, the 2019-2020 year, they were charged $42 a semester for students taking 7 or more credits, and $23 per semester for students taking 6 or less credits. Now, that is actually going to change for the 2020-2021 academic year. It'll be $45 per student per semester for students that are taking 7 or more credits, and it'll be $27 for students taking 6 or less credits per semester. So just some information on that. If you go down here and you look at some of the budget allocations, you can see kind of what our thought process was when we were budgeting fiscal year 20, or when we were in final budgeting during the spring 2019 semester. I'll break down those numbers a little bit more with a little bit more description of what the agency does and how it's kind of funded in final budgeting. So let's go down to just the account and the service summary. Now, a part of this is going to be a fiscal policy summary. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I will not be going through the entire fiscal policy document, as that would be too long and it's ever changing every single year. But I'll be giving good summations of portions of fiscal policy, such as the final budgeting section that's currently in place right now, the travel allocation section, special allocation section. I'll also be giving summations of STIP and the zero-based section. So let's get into it. The travel allocation section, this accounts for about 4% of the total budget for every year, and this accounted for the 4% of the fiscal year 20 budget. There are a couple things that go into this. So currently right now we have rates that are set for modes of transportation that obviously transport student groups to their destination. So private vehicles are, as of now, are funded 15 cents a mile. So every mile they drive, they get reimbursed 15 cents that the Senate allocates them. For lodging, it's $20 per person per night, up to 5 nights. And that's just a pretty good rate to go on. Currently, and I don't know what the status is of this right now for your Senate, but commercial airlines are capped at 75 or 25% of the ticket price, and the reimbursement cannot be over $75. So that is currently the commercial airfare. Over the last couple of years, it's been in flux and it's been debated very heavily. But it could be different your year. It could possibly be the same. But just as an FYI, you might want to look in section 14.3 of fiscal policy just to make sure that those rates are the same before you go into a travel section, and make sure to keep up to date on those rates. So the way that travel works now, and this is the last paragraph under the rates, there's 2 application periods every semester. You have one in the fall, one in the spring, and they're both pretty early on. The fall, usually the application is due the 3rd or the 4th week. In the spring, it's usually due the 2nd or the 3rd week. There's a big board on budget and finance meeting that usually takes 3 to 4 hours on average. Some have actually averaged 5 hours, and they go through meticulously and allocate all of the funding to every single travel request. And then it goes to the Senate, and it's a pretty long portion of the Senate meeting, but during that time as well, you allocate all the travel allocation. Now, that doesn't mean that if student groups can't get their requests in on time, that they're ineligible for travel allocation. They can submit their travel forms later. However, it's a higher vote threshold in order to allocate them funding. And typically there is less money that's allowed, that is given to them just based on the fact that most of the money is used in that initial travel period. The one thing I will say is that there is actually a check back to ensure if student groups get their applications in the late, that there is still money left over. 8% of every semester's travel allocation budget has to be left over for those emergency requests. So there is always money left over. There's just not a ton of money left over if 3 groups get it in. There won't be a ton that will be going to every single group. So it's better to get it in early and on the deadlines. The one other thing about travel allocation, and this is actually a very unique circumstance that only applies to student groups that are in unions, is that they have their own travel account. Now, the reason why there's a travel allocation account for general student groups is that travel is not funded during final budgeting. For unions, it actually is, along with agencies. Just for student groups, travel is not funded during final budgeting, and they have to go through a separate process during the academic year, because partially it's hard for them to predict it, but also it's just a little bit easier to see it, and you don't have such a long and drawn out final budgeting section. Now, if unions want to travel, they obviously have it budgeted in their final budgeting, but let's say they win a regional tournament and they get to go to nationals. Well, they couldn't account for that budgeting during the final budgeting session. So there's actually a separate account built in that's called union emergency, for the union emergency travel, for them to request funds. And typically this is of prestigious nature. They didn't know of the event earlier. The nature of the request has significantly or dramatically changed. And then they submit the request. It is a separate account for unions, and it's capped at a certain dollar amount. Currently it's capped at $6,000, but it could be different in future years. And from there, groups will just request that money to travel, and then the Board on Budget and Finance would see it, pass it on to the Senate, and then the Senate would pass it on, and the student group would probably get some money to travel to this unexpected event that would occur. So that's the only difference on travel, but that is a pretty good summation of what travel allocation is. The next account that I'm going to talk about is special allocation. Now, this account is kind of like an extension of final budgeting a little bit. That might be it's a decent way to describe it, but I'll get into a little bit more here. Basically what special allocation is an account that allows student groups to, let's say if they didn't plan for an event during final budgeting, or a nature of event has dramatically changed, then they can request that through this account and try to get additional funding. This is, again, similar along the lines of the union emergency in the fact that they didn't expect an event to happen or the nature of their event dramatically changed. And this is just kind of used to get additional supplies, get additional venues, get additional food, or any other thing for their event that they need. This is usually always less than the travel allocation account, just because travel is very, very heavily used. And special, there are some years when most years it's not used a ton. Some years, and this was the first year when I was on Senate, it was used so much that the account was almost at $0 by March of 2019, which would have been a really, really bad time towards student group special allocation funds. So it's pretty variable on just the way that student group activity works. And that's kind of a weird thing. The other thing is that for these types of events, it's always good to know whether if they're trying to get equipment or purchase equipment or buy stuff that could qualify as STIP. Now, it's good to catch that so that you're not spending a ton of money out of special allocation for that. And if you see something like that, that would be better to go to state term investment pool, or if they can rent that equipment for it. Getting a little bit off track here, but nonetheless, special allocation, just to kind of summarize this, is just the account that if student groups need more funding for an event, or if they have a new event that pops up, this is the account and this is where they go. The next one I'm going to talk about is administrative assessment, and this is something that is only dealt with during final budgeting. The administrative assessment is the fee that ASUM pays in order to store their money at the University of Montana. It's basically the rate that business services charge, and basically it works like an interest rate to store your money at a bank. So right now, this is actually another thing that is different from the fall 2019 or the fall 2020 semester. On the document, it says that the administrative fee constitutes 7% of the budget. And that is true. And I'm not sure how the percentage is going to change. But originally, the administrative assessment fee was a 7% tax on all money that we withdrew. It is now 8.75%. And so obviously that's going to change. And it's going to change the way that final budgeting works, because we're going to have to allocate a little bit more of additional funds to cover the administrative assessment fee. So obviously this takes care of business services to make sure that they remain solvent and that they can pay their employees. And yeah, that's pretty much a good overview. You don't really have to worry about this account too much. It's usually taken care of in the executive recommendations, and there's pretty much no discussion about it later. But if you have questions about it, make sure to talk to your business manager or talk to the accountant to get a little bit more knowledge on the administrative assessment. The next account that I'm going to talk about is zero-based carryover. And this is basically the slush fund, reserves, rainy day fund, whatever you want to call it, for ASUM. So there's a couple rules about this account that you should know. The first is that the account can never go below $100,000. This rule was actually implemented about a couple of years back when ASUM childcare was going through a real crisis, when they had to dramatically increase the amount of funds that they received from ASUM, and ASUM didn't have that funds to support it. So what ASUM did was they transferred the funding from the reserves to childcare, got a fee increase and supplemented the reserves back. And after going through that whole crisis, they set the bar at $100,000. It used to be $92,500, but they increased it to $100,000 just to make sure that we had a little bit more backing. There is a way that you can reduce it below $100,000, and that's with a 4/5 vote of the Senate. I've never seen it happen, and since that rule was implemented, it has actually never happened. So hopefully it doesn't happen this year, and hopefully it doesn't happen for you as long as ASUM does not get into that dire of a situation. Now, a couple other things that you can do with zero-based. It's the fund that if an agency gets into trouble, or like let's say, like an agency gets into trouble, it's a fund that can loan money out to agencies in order to correct that negative balance, and then the agency could hopefully pay it back. The other thing, and this is actually something that was implemented my first year on Senate, was it allows student groups that didn't go through the final budgeting process or were disqualified from going through the final budgeting process to apply for a zero-based budget. Now they could apply it the same way that they do through final budgeting, and it's judged on the zero-based account. And it's a pretty rigorous process. There's a vote on Senate just to allow them to go through the process. And there's a 2/3 vote to get it out on the board on budget and finance, and a 2/3 vote to confirm it in the Senate. So it's pretty lengthy, but it's a really, really cool way if student groups were disqualified for whatever reason, or there's a new student group that was formed that needed a budget, they could go through that process and be able to access funding and start up their student group instead of having to fund it all themselves during the first year that they're up and active. So really, really cool thing that was added to fiscal policy, and glad it's there. And that pretty much summarizes the zero-based account. So I'm going to go next on to kind of agencies accounts. And then when I'm done with agencies, actually, before I start with agencies, I'm going to talk about the state term investment pool account. If you want a little bit more information about STIP, it's section 20 of fiscal policy. Basically, this account is used for student groups to purchase equipment that is deemed a capital investment. Now, what is a capital investment and the criteria for ASUM? There's two criteria, really. The first is that I guess there's three criteria now. There is the value of the item has to be $150 or more. The second thing is that the item has to last for 2 or more years. And then the third thing is that it has to be its own individual item. So let's say you're buying hockey pucks. Or yeah, let's say you're buying hockey pucks. Those things could last, they could last for 2 or more years, but not each individual puck is worth more than $150. So if you bought a ton of them, you could add it up to be more than $150. It has to be every single individual item being of that value, or every single unique individual item of being of that value. So that's kind of what is the, actually I kind of messed that one up. Ignore that example. You can't combine different items in order to get to $150. You can combine similar items like hockey pucks to get to the $150 limit. But if it's, let's say, a hockey puck and a water bottle, you can't combine both. So it has to be unique items that are purchased, and they have to stand alone and they can't be combined with different things. So good thing to note. It's a pretty simple process, and right now our STIP account is pretty healthy. I think it's just over $200,000, and it works pretty much the same way that a special allocation or a travel allocation request works. You can submit whenever you want, and the Senate gets to see it, and hopefully the student group gets money out of it. So apologies for butchering that explanation, but I will try to move on from that and adequately explain the ASUM administration account. So obviously, this is an administration account or an agency account that gets funded during final budgeting every single year. This is basically the heart and soul of ASUM, the heart and soul of the student government and running the student groups and running the agencies. It's what funds the president, vice president, business managers pay, the secretaries pay, what pays the office manager, the accountant. It's also has funds for the student group coordinator and the student group resource center. And then in addition, it pays for rentals at Senate meetings. So if you're renting live streaming equipment, it rents that. It rents food for if you're doing retreat. It pays for travel for Board of Regents meeting, so on and so forth. So this basically funds the heart and the soul of what ASUM is. And if ASUM didn't have the administration there, then obviously its agencies and everything couldn't run. So there's that. Pretty simple and easy explanation for that. ASUM childcare, this obviously, final budgeting obviously funds ASUM childcare. And it usually constitutes a pretty big portion of the final budgeting pool. So that final budgeting session was 22% of the total funds. And during mine, we actually allocated an additional $31,000 to them compared to the prior fiscal year. So we allocated them a lot more money our year, and they usually hover between a fifth and a quarter of the funds that we distribute during final budgeting. So obviously ASUM childcare, it provides childcare services to students as well as some faculty and staff at the University of Montana. There's a certain number of spots and there's a pretty long waiting list. So it's a pretty heavily utilized service. They also have an additional revenue source with the infant care, as I explained above, of $2 per semester for all students. The agency has been around. We're actually going to be celebrating its 50th year this year, and I am pretty happy about that. It's a great agency that provides an amazing service to keep students in school. And it's definitely one that we like to tout a lot. It's a critical service in order to keeping students in school and in order for them to get an education. So really happy about that. And yeah, after that, that's pretty much a good summation of childcare. And let's go on to legal services. So just like childcare, legal services constitutes between a fifth and a quarter of the annual budget. And I already explained a little bit about what legal services is, but it provides low cost legal representation to students for a myriad of issues. So You can see some of the ones that are down below: landlord and tenant and housing issues, document drafting, so if you need wills, informal guardianships, and so on and so forth, they're there for that too. Family law, consumer matters, criminal cases, civil rights, and property damages. So a lot of issues that they represent specifically for students. They do have fees that students pay to use the legal services. So if you need like an initial consultation, it's $25. And then obviously if you use the service more, there's more payment, but it's still a very, very, very cheap service compared to other law firms in town. The next service is the ASUM Renter Center. And this is basically a student advocacy organization that enhances renters' rights. So making sure that renters know their rights and ensuring that they have fair treatment from their landlords. It also promotes policy change. So when you see the ledge session come up, you can sometimes see the director being involved with the student political action director and the political action efforts that are happening on the ledge or happening at Helena. And then also conducting educational and neighborhood outreach. So you can see sometimes they host block parties in the university district, or they go to neighborhood council meetings and so on and so forth. So you can see kind of some of the things that they do down here. I'll try not to be redundant, as I have been noticing that I have been during these videos, but you can kind of see what they do. There's also some aspects of their website that are just a little bit more than renter advocacy. So they have a housing finder or a roommate finder. And there's just a bunch of other services that they have on their website that's pretty cool, and hopefully renters will utilize that in the future, as they are still now. And then the last agency that I'll talk about is, actually, one more thing on the Renter Center. So the Renter Center, during this academic year, actually adopted the Food Pantry and officially adopted them as a sub-agency, I guess you could call them. And I think most of you will know what the Food Pantry does, but it's basically like a food bank. If people are food insecure or just need food, they can go in and get food free of judgment. And it's a great service that allows students to get the food that they need and not be food insecure, so that they can have the resource, what they need in order to succeed as a student, instead of worrying about basic needs like food in order to be educated. So there's that. There will probably be more presentations about the food pantry at your retreat or throughout the year if the food pantry coordinator comes to the Senate meetings. So make sure to look forward to that. It's a great service that was started by Kat Cowley a couple years ago, and it's been doing immense things for students at the University of Montana, and one of the agencies that I'm super proud that ASUM has. And then the last one is the ASUM Sustainability Center. So this is actually another one that's a little bit similar to transportation in the fact that it has its own fee. It's $6 per student, and actually just 2 weeks ago, it was made mandatory at the June Board of Regents meeting. So in the past, it has gotten funded through final budgeting with usually less than 1%, and it gets funded anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 every year. So there's that. There's two things that the Sustainability Center really serves. The first is that it serves as a resource for students to promote, develop, and implement sustainability efforts. So it obviously has big involvement with the ASUM Sustainability Board as well as the Recycling Board, which is actually now called the Zero Waste Board. And then in addition, it also serves, the Sustainability Director serves on the Sustainable Campus Committee, the SCC, and then works on sustainability initiatives across campus. So that, along with student interns and volunteers and senators, really work hard and make the Sustainability Center what it is. The second thing is it manages the CLES Revolving Energy Loan Fund, or CRELF. And actually the name just got changed when I was vice president to the CLES Sustainability Fund, as it's not really a loan fund anymore. It's more just a fund, and it really focuses on sustainability efforts instead of just revolving energy. So 87.5% of the fee revenue goes towards this, and a committee that is chaired by the sustainability coordinator doles out the funds to student projects or to projects all over campus. And there's quite a few projects that are applied, and there's quite a lot done with this fund, so it works out really well. Obviously, students at the University of Montana are very, very passionate about sustainability, and the center, as well as the CLUS Sustainability Fund, have been great at promoting and using that, using sustainability efforts to make change on the University of Montana. So, the last one I'm going to talk about are student group accounts. So obviously we talked about the union emergency travel account, so I won't go over that again, but sports union, music union, and student group operating budgets. These fill out the remainder of the final budgeting, and that year it accounted for about 15% of the budget. Our year accounted for significantly less because there was a significant budget deficit that was being ran when we took office. So you can kind of see that this year they had a little bit more money to play with when it came to allocating funds to student groups. Our year we had significantly less. So it fluctuates, but at a minimum, as I talked about earlier, $6 per semester are charged to all students that only goes to funding student groups. Now, it's not like a separate MST code that goes into final budgeting that funds it. It's just a measure that tracks if you're meeting that. And that's usually tracked for in the final budgeting Excel spreadsheet, which our accountant runs very well and make sure to keep track and make sure to keep track of that. And yeah, so that's just basically the premise of that. As long as the Senate hits $6 a semester per student for funding student groups, then the final budgeting session usually goes smooth. And then the last thing down below is that all the accounts I talked about benefit students. And the special accounts I talked about, like travel, special, zero-based 2, in addition to STIP, benefit student group functions and benefit them fulfilling their mission. And that's a big part of ASUM's mission, is to ensure that student groups have what they need to succeed and that we're giving them the resources in order to engage students on campus and to fulfill their mission. Now, the last thing I'll go to is the account balances for the fall 2019 semester, what we started out with. Typically, this is what you'll see at the top of the business manager's report. And obviously, you can see here, the state term investment and pool account was very, very large at the time. Zero base was, healthily above $100,000, and so on and so forth. This account listing is what you'll see at the top of at the top of every single business manager's report. So if you're ever wondering what the account balances are, just make sure to look on the agenda. And if it's during a time when there's not a Senate meeting, you can email the business manager or the accountant, and they can be sure to get you the account balances. So thank you for watching this one, and I will see you in the next video.